This walkway was never safe. Not after somebody changed the design. Not before it. Not on the day it opened. Not on the day it was inspected. And not on the day it was signed off as finished. From the moment it was built, it could barely hold up its own weight. And that's not the story you've been told. If you've heard about this one, you've heard it was a drawing. One small change to one detail made during construction, and 114 people died because of it. And that's true, but it's about a third of the story, and honestly, it's the least interesting third. Because here's the thing, even if that change had never happened, if the walkways had been built exactly the way the engineers originally drew them, they still wouldn't have passed the building code. Not even close. The original design was about 60% of what the code required. The version they actually built was 31. So this isn't a story about one bad decision. It's a story about how a thing that was already wrong got quietly made twice as wrong, and how not one single person in the entire chain stopped to check. Let me show you the actual steel. Kansas City, 1980. The Hyatt Regency opens with this enormous open atrium in the middle of it. 4 stories of empty air, glass roof. The whole thing designed to feel impressive the second you walk in. And crossing that empty space, they hung 3 walkways. 2nd floor, 3rd floor, 4th floor. No columns underneath them, nothing holding them up from below. They just hang there from the roof on steel rods, which is exactly why they looked so good. Now, here's the detail that decides who lives and who dies, and I want you to hold on to it. The 2nd floor walkway and the 4th floor walkway were stacked directly on top of each other. Same line, one above the other, hanging from the same set of rods. The 3rd floor walkway was off to the side on its own rods entirely. So the 3rd floor was a separate system. It was never part of what happened. Everything from here on is about those 2, the 2nd and the 4th, sharing one line of steel. And to hold them up, they ran steel rods from the roof framing all the way down. Rod goes through the walkway, a big nut and a washer underneath it. Walkway sits on the nut. That's it. That's the whole idea. It's the same as hanging a shelf, just much bigger and with a lot more people standing on it. Those rods were 1.25 inches thick, about the thickness of your thumb. That sounds thin, and it kind of is, but steel is genuinely strong in tension. When you pull on it, it holds. The rods were never the problem. Nobody died because a rod snapped. Hold on to that too, because almost everybody gets that part wrong. So this is what the engineers originally drew. One rod. One single continuous rod starting at the roof, running down through the 4th floor walkway and continuing down to the 2nd floor walkway below it. One long piece of steel, top to bottom. The 4th floor walkway sits on a nut, and the 2nd floor walkway sits on another nut further down the same rod. And this is the important bit. Watch where the weight goes. The 4th floor's weight pushes down on its nut and goes straight up the rod to the roof. And the 2nd floor's weight pushes down on its nut and goes straight up the same rod, past the 4th floor to the roof. They're on the same rod, but they're independent. The 4th floor is not carrying the 2nd floor. It's just sharing a rod with it. Both loads go to the roof separately. So the connection up at the 4th floor only ever has to hold one walkway, its own. That's the design. And like I said, even that design was only around 60% of code. It was already too weak, but nobody knew that yet because nobody had actually run the numbers on that connection, which is a sentence I'm going to say again later, and it's going to sound a lot worse the second time. Now, construction starts, and the steel fabricator, the company actually making these parts, looks at the drawing and says, "Hang on, there's a problem." Because think about what that one long rod actually means. The nut for the 4th floor walkway has to be screwed on and then traveled all the way down that rod to its position, which means you have to cut a thread into almost the entire length of the rod. And a thread is delicate. You're on a building site. You've got a 30-foot steel rod covered in thread. You're hauling it around. You're dragging it. You're knocking it against things. You damage that thread anywhere along it, and now your nut won't travel past the damage. It's a genuinely annoying, genuinely real construction problem. So the fabricator proposes a fix, and honestly, it's a sensible sounding fix. Instead of one long rod, use two short ones. First rod goes from the roof down to the fourth floor walkway and stops there. Then a second rod starts at the fourth floor walkway and goes down to the second floor. Two short rods instead of one long one. You only have to thread the ends. Problem solved. And if you look at it, if you just look at it, it's the same. Same rods, same nuts, same walkways in the same places. Nothing moved, nothing got thinner, nothing got cheaper. You could stand under it and not tell the difference. I think that's the part that gets me. It doesn't look like a mistake. It looks like housekeeping. But follow the weight again, because the weight is the only thing that matters here. Second floor walkway. Its weight pushes down on its nut. That nut is on the bottom of the second rod. And where does that second rod go? Up to the fourth floor walkway, and it stops there. So the second floor walkway is no longer hanging from the roof. It's hanging from the fourth floor walkway, which means that connection up at the fourth floor is now holding its own walkway, plus the entire walkway below it, plus everyone standing on it. It's carrying double. Exactly double, and nothing about the connection got any stronger to deal with that. Same beam, same nut, same washer, same weld. Twice the load. The way I think about it is, imagine you're hanging from a bar by your hands. That's the original design. You're holding you. Now imagine somebody grabs your ankles and hangs off you. Nothing about your grip changed. Your hands are the same hands, but you are now holding two people, and your grip is going to fail a lot sooner than you think. That's it. That's the whole disaster. Somebody grabbed the ankles. Self. Now let's actually look at the thing that broke, because this is where it stops being an idea and starts being metal. The walkway didn't hang off the rod directly. It hung off a steel beam that ran across the width of the walkway. And that beam wasn't a solid lump of steel. It was made of two C-shaped channels. Imagine two steel gutters, turned to face each other and welded together along their edges to make a hollow box. The rod came down through a hole in that box. Underneath it, a washer, then a big nut. Tighten the nut and the whole beam, and the whole walkway hanging off it rests on that nut pressing up on the underside of the box. So all that weight is being carried by a small patch of steel around one hole, and the two halves of that box were held together by a weld running along the seam. Now, and this is the second myth I want to kill, a lot of people think this was a welding failure, that somebody did a sloppy job, some dodgy weld gave way, and that's why people died. It wasn't. Investigators cut those welds out and tested them, and the welds met specification. They were fine. They were made properly. They were just being asked to do something no weld that size could ever do. The steel didn't fail because it was badly made. It failed because it was hopelessly, catastrophically overloaded. Which is a much scarier idea because you can inspect for a bad weld. You can't inspect for a bad idea. And when it went, it didn't snap the rod and it didn't break the nut. The nut pulled straight up through the steel box. It tore through the beam and split that welded seam apart, and the rod just slid through the hole it made. So let's come back to those two numbers, because now they'll actually mean something. If they built it the original way, one long rod, each walkway carrying itself, that connection would have been able to hold about 60% of what the building code demanded. Already failing, already not legal, already, if anyone had checked, a redesign. The way they actually built it? 31%. The official investigation put it about as bluntly as engineers ever put anything. They said that from the day of construction, the walkways had only minimal capacity to hold up their own weight and virtually no capacity to hold anything else. Read that again. Their own weight was nearly the whole budget. The walkways were essentially fully loaded when they were empty. Every single person who ever walked across them for a year was overloading them. Everyone who stood on them to look at the atrium, every single day. It held anyway, for a while, the way things sometimes do. And then on the 17th of July, 1981, they threw a party. It was a Friday evening tea dance, big band music, a competition, a couple thousand people in that atrium. And because the walkways were the best view in the building, people went up and stood on them to watch. At about 7:05, the connection on the east side of the fourth floor walkway let go. The fourth floor walkway dropped, and it fell exactly 30 feet. I'm not rounding, 30 feet on the nose, onto the second floor walkway directly underneath it, which never had a chance. It was already holding more than it should. It took the entire fourth floor walkway on top of it, and both of them went down together another 15 feet into a room full of people. 114 people were killed, more than 200 injured. For 20 years, until 2001, it was the deadliest structural collapse in American history. So here's the part that actually matters, and it's the reason engineers still study this specific building 40 years later. That change, one rod into two, wasn't hidden. It wasn't sneaked through. It went out on shop drawings, it went to the engineers, and it came back approved. But nobody ran the numbers on it. There were no calculations. Nobody sat down and did the one piece of arithmetic, and it is one piece of arithmetic, that would have shown that connection was now carrying double. And remember, nobody had checked the original either. That's how it was already at 60% before anyone touched it. The change didn't create the flaw. The change doubled the flaw that was already there and had never been looked at by anyone. So it's not really the story of a bad drawing. It's the story of a connection that everybody assumed somebody else had checked. The engineers involved lost their licenses, and the whole profession changed how it handles this. Who's responsible for reviewing shop drawings, how changes get approved, who has to put their name on what. If you work in structural engineering today, some of the rules you follow exist because of this atrium. But the thing I keep coming back to is how ordinary it all was. Nobody was reckless. Nobody cut a corner to save money. A fabricator raised a real, sensible construction problem. Somebody proposed a reasonable-sounding fix. Somebody approved it. And 114 people died because at no point did anyone stop and follow the weight. If you want to see what happens when a structure is designed perfectly and the ground itself is the thing that fails, I broke down a dam that collapsed before it was ever finished filling. That one's next.